So we spoke a little bit yesterday about how freedom from suffering is available to us in every part of our experience, that it's not something that we have to wait for that magical moment, nor is it something we have to earn through spiritual practice. But it's available to us in spiritual practice and outside of spiritual practice, because the whole of life is the invitation. The invitation is to live the inquiry, not as an intellectual exercise that you have to apply to every thought and every feeling and so on. That would be exhausting. But a living inquiry in the sense, as we spoke yesterday, of becoming sensitive to the mechanism that is playing itself out in your daily interactions, your relationship to yourself, your relationship to your thoughts, your relationship to your feelings, your relationships to each other. We are constantly in relationship. There is a subject and there is an object. We are the subject and the object is whatever arises in your mind, in your sensations, in your feelings. Everything that appears in your perception is the object. So you're constantly in relationship. However, this relationship is mostly unconscious, as are most relationships. In the sense that you're either moving towards the object so that you can lose yourself in that object, avoid yourself, possess the object, or you're running away from it so that you can avoid it, reject it, overpower it. And in this moving towards or moving away, you live in a divided state. There are seemingly two, you and whatever is happening. The living inquiry is to see that mechanism, to become sensitive to it. It plays out in many different ways, many different strategies. When we start to see clearly, then we can start to investigate. To investigate what is true. To investigate the bare fact of our experience, not the imagination of it. The imagination of it is the narrative that we create create around our experience, and so on. Very often, and we again touched on it briefly yesterday in some of the questions, when very often we do things, we act in certain ways. Very often these ways of acting, these impulses or compulsions to do, whether it's to reach out for something to eat, or whether it's to turn on the TV or watch a movie, or whether it's to read a book, or whether it's to help somebody, whatever it is. Very often we are motivated by something unconscious. We're motivated by the fear of truly meeting ourselves. And so we attempt to lose ourselves in the world, which ends up as doing. There's nothing wrong with doing when it serves a function. But we touched on it a little bit yesterday when there was a question about how can I meet the other more deeply? How can I be more intimately with myself and with other, not constantly trying to do something for them? That was just one example. What we're really doing is attempting to merge with the object of our doing so that we can feel complete. Because underneath that is a fear of meeting our primary or core wound of separation. An existential wound that each of us carries, simply by the mere fact that we have been born seemingly into form and separated from the oceanic womb of consciousness. When this wound isn't, which becomes a belief, isn't met, then there's a fear of meeting that. Then we live from a sense of me as a separate entity. And then there's this compulsion to move towards or merge with the object that appears in consciousness. It could be a thought, stickiness of thoughts. It could be a doing something. It could be a filling up with something. We call that addiction sometimes, or compulsion. And it can be very subtle. In my case, at some point, I saw that the movement towards, there were two things, they're very subtle. The movement towards reading and the movement towards having a treat to eat were both avoidances of an existential aloneness. Yeah, so this mechanism of avoidance, of what we might call an existential aloneness, the core separation, the core sense of separation, of me as a separate entity, was avoided in these very harmless movements, harmless actions. Now there's nothing wrong with any of that. When it arises out of wholeness, when it arises out of completeness. But mostly it's a movement away from facing our aloneness. In seeing that mechanism, there was the possibility, the decision, you might say, to just stop and not follow that movement of thought or movement of desire, however seemingly harmless it was. Now that's not an overpowering of it, it's not a control of it, it's not using the self to control the self. There was just something, you might call it awareness, that saw the futility of that, of following that compulsion. Yeah, it's the same when we follow or stick to the movement of thoughts, especially when it's about dreaming about the future. That was another habit, another compulsion. In that stopping of the following, merging with that movement, a kind of abyss opens up. And in that abyss is the terror that we spoke of yesterday. And if we hang with that, if we stay suspended in that not knowing, we may come to realize the blip, that very small movement in which the imaginary self is seen to be a complete figment of the imagination. Once that's fully seen, it's like an energetic knot, an energetic mass that we were caught up in, dissolves. And in that dissolvement, there's a freedom. That freedom is often experienced as an aha. It can be very profound or it can be very subtle. So, the living inquiry starts with the willingness to see, to become sensitive to. It's not behavioral control. It's just a sensitivity. It's a kind of slowing down. When we slow down, we start to fall into an inner silence. And in that inner silence, everything that is not that, everything that is not already whole, arising out of wholeness, comes up to be seen. Whether that's abandonment, whether that's rejection, whether that's unlovability, whether that's unworthiness, and so on. And in that we have the opportunity the opportunity to wake up out of the dream of separation. Because in being with that, in meeting that sense of unlovability or rejection or abandonment, without the narrative about it, the narrative about it is because my parents abandoned me, or because my lover left, or because I've lost my dog, or whatever it might be. When we sit, when we be energetically with the primary sense of separation, without a narrative, we have the opportunity to see it, or feel, or sense that that which is here, even prior to that, is completely untouched. It cannot be separate. It cannot be divided. So everything in our lives is a doorway to waking up out of the dream of separation. Everything. Nothing is too small or too ordinary to be investigated. Very often we push aside our human experience, either believing it's something that we need to fix, so that we can become better, or something that we need to just transcend, and then we focus on the spiritual development, the spiritual practice. But all the time there is a division. True inquiry, true living spiritual practice is the inclusion of the human in the inquiry. It's not about the self fixing the self, and neither is it about the self having the spiritual insight. It's about seeing what's more primary than the self that's trying to do anything or get anything. So everything can be included. Everything is welcome. Everything is a doorway